The Liquor Control Board recently proposed new regulations to the Independent Regulatory Review Commission on how taverns and other liquor licensees handle recycling. I submitted comments on the proposal during the IRC process, and I'm convinced that the LCB's proposed regulation, if implemented, will actually discourage recycling. LCB's new regulation requires a liquor licensee intending to recycle liquor bottles to complete unnecessary paperwork and administrative tasks. A licensee must possess written proof that their county recycles the type of material the licensee proposes to recycle, retain copies of a receipt or invoice from the trash hauler that picks up their recycling, and complete a, quote, simple form every time a tavern owner voluntarily transports used liquor bottles to a drop-off location, stating exactly, quote, what was delivered to the drop-off location and when. All documents must be retained for 2 years. If a liquor licensee currently recycles glass liquor bottles or plastic liquor bottles on a voluntary basis, I am convinced that the LCB's new regulation will result in licensees halting their existing recycling program and instead disposing of empty liquor bottles in the trash. If the LCB's new regulation is finalized, bar owners will determine that keeping track of 2 years' worth of, quote, simple forms denoting which liquor bottles were delivered to a drop-off location and when is simply not worth the hassle or the potential fine if the LCB determines record keeping is inadequate. For this licensee, rather than take on all of this administrative burden, the simpler and less risky solution is to simply throw the bottles in the trash. I submit that it could not possibly be the legislative intent of the General Assembly to discourage licensees from recycling. The LCB's proposal is a classic example of government regulation run amok, giving small business owners more to do, regulators more to enforce, liquor control enforcement more reason to issue fines, and discouraging recycling to boot. There is no real benefit to anyone. As an alternative to the LCB's regulations, I've proposed that the legal requirement for a, quote, proof in writing and proof of participation in a recycling program could be satisfied by simply requiring a licensee who participates in a recycling program to display a clearly posted sign in the licensed premise next to the establishment's liquor license that states, this establishment participates in a recycling program. This alternative benefits from simplicity and enforcement for both the board and the licensee. There's no room for debate, confusion, or interpretation. Would the LCB be willing to entertain this proposal to encourage recycling while reducing administrative burdens and unnecessary regulations on liquor licensees across the Commonwealth?
Representative, we are familiar with the proposed regulation, and we also are familiar with your concerns about it. I think at this time it would be, if we could defer to our Executive Director, Charlie Mooney, to address the representative's concerns.
Representative Lawrence, I'm familiar with the process, and I don't have all the details, and if need be, I'll just ask Mr. Diaz to step forward here and get sworn in, who can give the real details. But the final draft of the proposed regulation is back in our Office of Chief Counsel, where it's being reviewed and all comments are being taken into consideration. And we haven't seen the final revised recommendation from our Chief Counsel's office, nor has the board. So they're not familiar with the back and forth. And if you'd like to talk to Mr. Diaz, he's sitting right behind me.
And Representative, we did receive your comments. By way of background, what the Liquor Code now requires is that all licensees should destroy their alcohol bottles within 24 hours of their use to prevent refilling. They then created an exception for recycling. And there are certain municipalities that had mandatory recycling, so there's no question at that point as to whether or not they're participating. We received an inquiry from a licensee who was not in a municipality that required mandatory recycling, and the statute says you have to provide written proof of participating in a voluntary program. And their question to us was, how do I prove that? Because if I can't show it, I can get cited by the state police. What we had suggested in our regulation is we addressed every scenario that we could find, and articulated the manner in which you could prove it. And proof can consist of, here's the voluntary recycling program, and this is what they collect. The representative has given us his comments and had given that very suggestion. And right now, the board is considering all those suggestions. It has not come up for final consideration by the board. It will have to go back to the board for consideration. We had received another comment as well. The issue really is with the statute, not with so much of our requirement. We're trying to let people take advantage of voluntarily recycling. And the 2-year references, that's what they have to keep all the records for 2 years. We weren't trying to be burdensome there. So I'm sure the board will consider the comments. We're going to give them all the comments and our responses, and they're going to make a decision soon, and then it'll go back to IRC, and then IRC will make a decision.
But so I mean, I guess just from a straight government bureaucracy, regulations run amok kind of view, wouldn't we want to be making regulations that are as effective as possible, not discouraging folks from recycling, and make them as simple as possible while being effective for both licensees and for enforcement?
And we're trying to do that, and I realize that you disagree with the solution we had come up with, but the board is going to have, again, an opportunity to look at it and take your comments into consideration. We're not trying to make it hard. We're trying to help a licensee who wants to voluntarily recycle to voluntarily recycle. That's all we're trying to do. It's the statute that's the issue.
Mr. Chairman, I realize I'm over time, so I'll leave it there, but I will say I'm looking forward to introducing legislation and working with Chairman Pyle to change the statute to make it easier to recycle.
Thank you, Representative. Your comments will be taken on consideration.
Thank you, I appreciate that.